Hi there, I'm Vincent Boss and I provide dating and self-improvement advice. And in today's podcast, we're going to be discussing the reason your ex ignores you. I provide audio coaching for breakup recovery, trying to get an ex back, attracting someone new, and life coaching. Visit www.dateme.tips for more details. Please check your spam and junk folders if you are expecting an email from me. So now let's get back into today's podcast, and today we are discussing the reason your ex ignores you. So if you've gone through a breakup and want to try to get your ex back, it can feel very painful if your ex ignores you. But why are they doing this? In today's podcast, I'll be discussing 3 reasons why your ex ignores you. So let's get straight into this. And point number 1 is dumpee wants to avoid pain. So initially we're going to be speaking about why a dumpee might ignore their dumper. Now if you're looking at this from the other perspective, if you're a dumpee and you want to know why your ex-dumper is ignoring you, then please keep listening because I'm going to be speaking from your perspective very, very shortly. But first of all, like I said, we're going to be speaking from a perspective of why a dumpee may ignore their dumper. So if you're listening to this as a dumper, then of course you ended the relationship. You did not feel that it was going the way you wanted. You made that call, you made that action, the decision was made, the relationship ended. And now at some point in the future, you have changed your mind. Whether this is weeks, most likely maybe months, maybe even years down the line, you've changed your mind. And you want to reconnect with your dumpee. So you reach out to them, which incidentally, I think is the right thing for you to be doing. If you end a relationship, it's up to you to reach out to your dumpee. So that's not the problem. But if you now find that your ex-dumpee hasn't responded to you, this can feel very confusing and very painful, because as a dumper, you felt that because you ended a relationship and you found out your ex didn't want it to end, you realised, unfortunately, that they were left heartbroken, and therefore you thought to yourself that they must really want me. They didn't want this to end, they're very, very upset. So therefore, when I've reached out to them, why aren't they jumping on this? Why aren't they excited that, hey, I'm back, I've changed my mind? You're wondering why they aren't celebrating almost your return. Now, maybe you're not looking at it from exactly that perspective, but you know what I'm saying. You've ended a relationship, they didn't want it to end. You've come back in one way, shape or the other, and your dumpee has ignored you, and you don't understand why. And the main reason why a dumpee might decide to not respond to their dumper is because they want to avoid pain. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that the dumpee never wants to reconnect in the future. Maybe at this stage, they're bouncing back and forth in their mind whether they do or whether they don't. Perhaps they just want some time to consider it. But it would seem as though that this is beyond the point of where they're desperately trying to reconnect with you. Now, maybe this is many, many months into the future, maybe years into the future, or perhaps it has not been very long at all. But if your dumpee doesn't respond, then this is likely because they want to avoid pain. Now, this could be from a perspective that they feel that if you were to speak again, that this would just go wrong. This might be from a perspective that they feel if you were to reconnect, that actually you only want friendship or something that they're not looking for, and therefore they just think, well, what's the point in responding? This isn't going to go the way that I'm hoping, so there's just no point. Or a dumpee might be in a position where they're now focusing on moving forward with their life and making new connections. And as a dumper, you can't hold that against them. You ended the relationship, and at that time, both of you became single. You could do what you wanted to do, they could do what they wanted to do, and there would likely be a period of time where they would have done anything to reconnect with you. But if they don't respond, and they fall into that third category, where they've decided to move forward and try and connect with new people, maybe they already have, like I said, you can't hold that against them. This is a position they found themselves in, and they're now making the best of it. However, this could easily be a scenario where your dumpee does want to reconnect, or maybe they're still contemplating it but will land in that position in the future. So as a dumper, my suggestion would be, yes, reach out to your dumpee, but if you don't hear anything, then give them space. If and when your dumpee wants to speak with you, they will likely respond to your contacts, whether it was a text or a call, however you did it. If they know you contacted them, and if they know it is for an authentic reason, then they are very likely to one day in the future respond to you if they want to have a conversation and maybe reconnect. It might not be instantly. It might not be the same day, same week, same month. They might really want to be contemplating their thoughts. But if you want to reconnect with your dumpee, you will leave that time open, at least for a while, for them to consider their thoughts. Of course, you as a dumper have had time to consider your thoughts, and now you've decided to come back to your dumpee. So you need to give them just as much opportunity to consider. However, when we're looking at it plainly about the potential reason about why your ex ignores you, if you're the dumper reaching out to a dumpee, mainly it's to the dumpee wanting to avoid further pain because they're just worried that reconnecting with you in one way, shape or the other, whether it's just speaking, texting, meeting or a new relationship, they're just worried that it might no longer work. So now let's get into point number 2 and the second point of today's podcast. Please like this video if you're watching on YouTube and subscribe to the channel. And point number 2 is dumper chose a new direction. So now we're going to speak about from the perspective of a dumpee wondering why their ex, the dumper, is not responding to them. So the scenario that we're imagining now is that somebody has ended a relationship, they of course become the dumper, and the dumpee did not want this to end. And therefore, they keep reaching out to their dumper. They keep sending text messages to their dumper. Now, this might be over the course of hours after the breakup, days, weeks, months, or beyond. But a dumpee is wondering, why is my ex not responding? Why am I being ignored? We was in a relationship for a long time. Don't they want to try and sort this out? Well, I would suggest that if this is the situation that you find yourself in, the most likely reason why your ex, the dumper, is not responding is because they've chose a new direction. So we have to consider that a relationship ends when somebody loses romantic emotional attraction. And when it hits the necessary low point, this is when a relationship ends. This is when the dumper will action the breakup. At that time, they are ready to go in a new direction on a new path. Now, of course, during the breakup itself, you would have had opportunity as a dumpee to say your piece, to try and persuade your ex to give this another go. But if they've decided not to, if they've decided they want to complete the breakup and move forward on their own path, then that is exactly what they're doing. They've chosen a new direction. And if you keep texting them, are they likely to be persuaded otherwise if they couldn't be persuaded during the breakup itself? The likelihood is you can't quote-unquote persuade your ex the dumper to change their mind. The only reason they're going to change their mind is if they genuinely feel a new growth of romantic emotional attraction in their mind, and therefore they want to be with you. They can't be persuaded to be with you. They need to feel that they want to be with you. And this can happen. This isn't something which is impossible. But if your dumper is ignoring you, it's likely because they want to try out that new path. Let's just think of an analogy, for example, of if, for instance, you decided that you wanted to go on holiday or vacation to a certain different country, okay? You've got it all planned out, you book your flights, you're ready to go, and then somebody says to you, hey, why don't you, instead of going on this holiday or this vacation that you've paid for and that you've invested a lot of thought and time and concept towards, why don't you instead just not go and just stay at home? Okay, you're not likely to change your mind at that point. You've invested time, you've invested money, you've booked your flights, you're ready to go. Now, that doesn't mean you're not going to come home afterwards, but it does mean that you want to try this new journey. Now, this is somewhat similar to what I'm trying to get across. Your ex, the dumper, lost romantic emotional attraction. When it hit the necessary low point, this is when they became invested in a new direction. This is when they became invested in the thought, but I want to try something new on a different path. It doesn't mean they might not change their mind in the future. It doesn't mean they might not be in a position where they regret what they're doing. But right now, they're fully invested in trying out this new path. So if you reach out to your dumper, you don't get a response, you don't understand why, you've got to understand that the breakup itself was when the communicating would likely have been done. They've made that choice. Maybe they told you exactly why, maybe they didn't. But when they ended the relationship, that was a clear signal that they're now invested in a new direction. And they're not likely to be able to be persuaded to quote unquote stay home, to try and stay with you, to try and work things out, because now their mindset is somewhere else. And that's why I strongly suggest that in most instances, if you've been dumped and want to try to get your ex back, you should never contact your ex again unless they contact you first, because it needs to come from them. It can't come because you are trying to persuade them to stay with you. They've got to want to. So yes, they're likely going on their own path right now, but there is always a chance that they will return, but they're not going to be persuaded to not even go on that journey. This is something they're ready for, they're prepared for, you don't want them to go, but unfortunately right now, they are going. Now, if you want advice and support about how to try to increase the chance of one day getting your ex back, then you may want to consider my audio coaching service, where me and you can speak one-on-one about your unique specific situation. Go to my website www.dateme.tips for more information about how I can become your coach and your teammate via my audio coaching service. So now let's get into point number 3 and the final point of today's podcast, about the reason your ex ignores you. And point number 3 is they don't feel a strong vibe. Now, point number 3 is different to what we've been speaking about so far. In point number 1 and 2, this was in the respect of you reaching out to your ex and them ignoring you completely. In point number 3, we're considering things a little bit differently. Theoretically, you have had conversation, okay? The relationship ended. Whichever perspective you're on, it ended, but since then, you've had conversation. But now, it's suddenly stopped. Why is this? Why would a conversation that seemed to be growing in your mind suddenly stop? This isn't about your ex ignoring you initially, it's about your ex ignoring you now. After a conversation, maybe even you met. Why is that? Well, generally speaking, this is because they don't feel a strong vibe. It doesn't mean that they necessarily feel a bad vibe. It doesn't necessarily mean that they've got real bad emotions and feelings towards you. It just means that when they were speaking, texting, maybe meeting, they didn't feel a strong enough vibe to grow this further. Now you, if you're a dumpee or a dump, whatever position you're in, and you're thinking that you were on the verge of reconnecting, and when your ex kind of ghosts you, this can be very painful, upsetting, and confusing. But you've got to understand that from your ex's perspective, they didn't feel what you're feeling. Now, I'm not excusing their behaviour. If somebody ghosts you, that's terrible. I think they should give you a reason, an explanation, a conversation about where they're at and why they're doing this. But we have to understand that from what you see is not necessarily what they see. You might see this as we've had a number of good conversations, we met once, I feel like we're on the verge of getting back together, and now they've ghosted me. What they're thinking possibly is we've had some chats, I didn't really know how I felt, I gave them the benefit of the doubt, we met up, I just wasn't feeling it. Now, I really don't want to cause any more heartbreak or pain. I don't know what to say. I'm not sure how to do this. So I'm kind of just going to buy myself some time and not say anything right now. And then the hours turn into days, into weeks. And then they get to the stage where they don't respond at all. Now, again, I'm not saying this is good. I'm not saying this is behavior you should be showcasing to anybody. But it is the reality. Sometimes people start to speak again. This is what I call the communication stage. Maybe they do meet up even, but sadly, the vibe isn't there, at least for one person. Maybe you felt it, but if they have suddenly started to ignore you, the likelihood is that they didn't. Now, does this mean that they can't in the future? Well, no, I would never say never, but you must consider your own thoughts, your own feelings, and your own self-worth. How many times, if you're the dumpee, for instance, do you want to be caught into this loop? Because theoretically, you were dumped, then maybe one way or the other you started speaking again. Now your ex has ghosted you. I mean, how many more times do you want to be within this cycle? If it's not working then and it's not working now, could it work in the future? Maybe, but I wouldn't put yourself through that time and time again. If you're a dumpee in particular listening to this, I would strongly suggest that you move forward with your life and make new connections with people who feel a strong vibe with you. Because just because your ex doesn't, it doesn't mean that others won't. Also, it's important to say your relationship has not been devalued. What you had together would have been real. It would likely have been very special to both of you. But sadly, right now, the connection is not where it once was. The relationship ended, you spoke again it seems, now they vanished again. Unfortunately, it's not at the point where both of you feel it should be going forward. And at that point, you really need to consider what you need to do to move forward and enjoy your life to the full. Because just because this person isn't giving you the love that you deserve, you can find somebody who will. Always remember that with or without your ex, you will have a positive future. If you believe that this podcast has helped you, then please consider buying me a coffee. The link to do so is in the description.